Well, church, good morning. My name is Mike, and I'm the site pastor for Grace Harborcreek. And today, I want to bring you an oldie, but a goodie. It's the story of David and Goliath. And it's one of the most well-known stories in the entire Bible, and it's one of the favorites that we love to teach in Sunday school. But that presents a challenge to us, precisely because we've already heard it 100 times. So today, I want to challenge you to experience this story through a different lens, a new perspective. I want you all to picture yourselves in this story as I describe it in the second person. Imagine the scenes and the details as I describe them as if you're there. And let's see if we can't view this old story in a new way. Are you ready? It's going to be kind of weird. It's going to be kind of funky, but ride with me, okay? Here we go. Close your eyes with me for just a minute as we get started. You're standing on rocky ground, and you shift the weight between your feet because you've already been standing for an hour. You're shoulder to shoulder with men on your left and your right, and you can feel the presence of rows of men and fellow soldiers behind you. It smells like a locker room. And the only way that the smell dissipates is with the occasional breeze that rolls through. It's beginning to get hot. The sun has already risen. It's almost midday, and the coolness of the morning has burned off. A bead of sweat runs down your chest, and the straps of the homemade armor dig into your shoulders. It's been 2 weeks since you've been called to service in King Saul's army to repel the invading Philistines. You remember sitting as a young child listening to the stories of your grandfathers as he would recall to you the events when he was pressed into service to also repel the Philistine army in years past. And now you find yourself with your own story to experience. Hopefully, you live long enough to tell it to your grandkids. As you open your eyes, the rocky ground in front of you descends into a dry stream bed, and then it begins to rise back up again, and you can see the other bank. You look and you see a multitude of human figures, all whose weapons and armor are glinting in the midday sun. And past them, you can see beyond, and the elevation descends, and you can see in the far distance a luscious green valley. And you know this valley. It's the valley of Elah. You traveled through it with your father before, and you wish you were there now instead of on this rocky, dry riverbank. But of course, that's impossible. Those Philistines have their back to that valley, which means it's theirs now. And hopefully, everything behind you doesn't become theirs as well. All of a sudden, that line of figures begins to part. And out comes this giant of a man. You can tell even from the distance, he must be 9 feet tall. He's dressed head to toe in armor that, by the looks of it, it must weigh hundreds of pounds. It's far nicer than anything you've been able to put together. But he moves with those hundreds of pounds as if it weighs nothing. His spear is taller than you are, and the tip of it itself must weigh 15 pounds. You wouldn't be able to even wrap your hand around the shaft of his spear. It's so large. And some poor guy behind him looks tiny in comparison, trails the giant, staggering under the weight of this massive shield. His voice booms across the distance between the armies. Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. Nobody moves. Nobody answers. As you look around, everyone's eyes are wide open at the prospect of battling this giant. One soldier is visibly shaking, and you can look to the left, and as you do, you see King Saul in the corner of your eye. He's not doing anything. After a moment, finally, he turns around briskly and leaves the battlefield, and you think to yourself, what do we do now? Well, the days pass and you find yourself back in formation. The sun is still high. It's still hot. Your armor still chafes. For the first couple weeks, as you've done this every single day, over and over again, you were nervous and scared, and the giant kept coming out and giving his challenge. But after those couple of weeks, you became angry. Like, isn't someone going to go do something about this? But now it's been 40 days of this giant giving the challenge over and over, and now you're just bored. Heck, you wish there'd just be a fight already, at least between the armies, but who cares? At least then you could go home, even if you lost. As the giant comes out once again, just like clockwork, and gives the same insulting speech as before, you get bumped from behind. When you look, it's this young kid who's weaving his way through the Israelite ranks. You've not ever seen him before, and you have no idea why a child is here amongst the army. All of a sudden, you hear this kid speaking. What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? What a cheeky SOB. Like, who does this kid think he is? Where has he been the last 40 days as we've lined up over and over and over? And you hear someone in the back a few rows beyond reply to him, the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches and will even give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel. Then you hear Eliab begin berating this young guy. Eliab, now he's a good soldier. He's strong, he's smart, and he's looked at as kind of a leader amongst your group. You know, in these 40 days and nights that he's talked about being the oldest in his family, then, you see it now, the resemblance. This squirt must be his youngest brother. Yeah, Eliab has told you he's got two of his next older brothers, and the three of them, they served together in King Saul's army, and you've seen them around. But his youngest brother, David, I think was his name, he was too young to fight. Instead, I guess he's been going back and forth between his father's house and the army, bringing his brothers food and provisions. Yeah, Eliab he's not a big fan of his brother David. He begins to berate him. Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? Eliab says to David, I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. You hear David's reply, what have I done now? Was it not but a word? And he wanders off and begins asking other soldiers the same question about what will happen to the person who kills the giant. And he gets the same response, and you're just thinking, whatever. Dream on, kid. I got bigger things to worry about. Well, later, as the day comes to a close, and once again, nothing has happened, you go back to your campfire and to your tent. And you're eating dinner with a couple of your fellow soldiers, and your commander walks by and he kicks you. And he says, you've got duty with the king's personal security detail tonight. Be over there in 15 minutes. You can't wait to get back to the farm. Duty is the worst part of military service. You scarf down your food real quick. You throw on your armor that's still damp from the sweat, and you jog on over to the king's tent. Only a couple minutes have passed after you get settled in your position in front of the flap. And one of the king's commanders quickly brushes past. And in tow is that same kid, David. What the heck is he doing going into King Saul? And so you lean a little bit closer towards the tent opening, straining to listen. And you hear this. Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." What? Like this kid David is nuts. First he's mouthing off it, but now he's in front of the king, and you hear the king reply to him, "You're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." And then you hear David begin to tell this story. "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he rose against me, I caught him by his beard and I struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God." I mean, your jaw is hanging open at this point. Like, the giant himself could have walked by and you probably wouldn't have even noticed. That's how flabbergasted you are at what this kid is saying to the king. He continues, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Okay, all right, hold on. If this story is true, got it. You can appreciate what he's accomplished. Like, that's no small feat. Think about it. Killing a lion and a bear all on your own. Heck, I mean, if that was your flock, like, see ya, sheep. Like, I'm telling Dad, I'm only coming back with one less. So no wonder he's got some courage right now. But that giant is a whole different thing. That giant isn't some animal. That giant is a man of war. And after sitting there quietly for a minute, as these thoughts run through your head, you hear King Saul finally say, "Go, and the Lord be with you." You can't believe what you're hearing. This child is going to fight the giant, and the whole battle, the fate of the nation potentially, is going to hang on him. There's no way this turns out well. You hear Saul order his personal armor and weapons brought forward, and his servants begin putting it on David. And you peek in to see, to get a look at what's going on, and you see that the body armor hangs off David haphazardly because it's 2 sizes too big. The top of the helmet sits so low on his head that it almost covers his eyes. David looks like a clown as he stumbles around the room. And eventually he says, "I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them." This kid David is going to fight the biggest, baddest, most well-trained warrior anyone has ever seen, and he's going to do it without any armor or weapons. Everything dissipates. Everyone goes back and prepares for the next day, and you spend the rest of the night on guard duty, planning your escape route for after the inevitable defeat tomorrow. Before you know it, you've been thinking all night. The sun begins to peek over the horizon. King Saul wakes up and appears at the tent entrance, and wordlessly he walks off to the latrine to relieve himself, and you, as part of the personal security guard, dutifully follow him. In the distance, you see David near a small stream. He bends over and he's picking up stones. Eventually, he finds 5 of them that he likes and he puts them in his pouch, and he walks away with his staff in hand. Oh, today is going to be a day that you'll never forget. You're sure about that. The time comes to form up the army as you've done every single day for the last 40, and you think, geez, at least you'll get a front row seat to the show as the King's Guard, whatever the heck happens next. And as if on cue, as the ranks solidify on either side of the stream bed, the Philistine ranks depart, and out comes that giant. But something differently happens this time, because then out walks David, looking especially small as he stands alone in the space between the armies. And as he walks out, you hear King Saul say to the commander of his army, "Abner, whose son is this youth?" And Abner replies, "As your soul lives, O king, I do not know." And the king said, "Inquire whose son the boy is." Suddenly, it hits you. Saul is the king. Saul stands ahead above every Israelite you know. His armor and his weapons are the best in the nation, and he has the most sophisticated military training of anybody in the army. And he's letting a boy fight this giant instead of himself. This makes no sense. You think this is why God gave us a king, to fight our battles for us. You see courage in David out there, and you see fear in Saul right here. Who's truly acting like a king right now? Once the giant realizes that David is actually challenging me, someone's actually walking out to meet him this time, he booms. "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And then after some colorful language, he continues, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field." But then comes David's response. His voice, honestly, it carries far more than you thought it would. There's a confidence in his speaking that you don't expect considering the odds and the situation. "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down, and I will cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." David is undersized, he's under-equipped, and he's wildly undertrained, but he seems to have an acute and unexplainable confidence that he has been chosen and prepared for this very moment. Suddenly, the time for talking has ended. The giant, visibly furious now, begins lumbering towards David with his armor bearer in tow. You can tell he's a seasoned warrior by his measured movements. But there goes David. He's sprinting full bore right at the giant. And as the gap between them closes, you see David reach into his pouch, pull out a stone, and seamlessly put it into his sling while running. David's arms raise above his head, and after a couple of twirls, he lets loose his stone. The battlefield is completely silent. No one moves. No one even breathes. All eyes are on the duel. The stone impresses itself into the giant's head. He looks confused, takes a staggered step forward, pauses for the longest second of your life, and then crashes to the ground. And once again, it is perfect silence. You can't believe what you just saw. David moves quickly to the body, pulls out a sword, and he cuts off the giant's head. He lifts it above his own and faces the army. And then you hear a thundering, guttural, and primal roar from the Israelite lines as they build into a crescendo like you've never heard. And before you know it, your voice joins in the chorus. All of a sudden, your body is sprinting with the rest of the army towards the Philistine lines. Everything is a blur as you watch the Philistine soldiers turn their backs, throw down their weapons, and run from you. For 3 miles, you and the rest of the army pursue and slaughter the Philistines until you collapse from exhaustion. Never in your life would you have imagined this being how the day ended. And as you catch your breath and pick yourself up, you begin raggedly walking back to plunder the Philistine camp, and you see David and King Saul. And the king asks, "Whose son are you, young man?" Church, David was a man after God's own heart. Earlier in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 14, we read Samuel telling Saul on behalf of God, "But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart." And Paul, while preaching in Antioch in Acts 13:22, says, "And when he, God, had removed him, Saul, he raised up David to be their king, of whom he testified and said, I have found in David the son of Jesse, a man after my heart, who will do all my will." Church, while this story is famously between David and Goliath, the author is really comparing David and Saul. Saul was the king. Saul was the best trained and best equipped warrior in all of Israel. David was young. He was small. He wasn't rich, and he was completely unknown. He probably had no idea what he was even capable of or what he'd be called to do, and yet he accomplished one of the greatest feats in human history, something which still resonates to this day. David is proof of my big idea today, that God can accomplish great things through anyone. God can accomplish great things through anyone. And I want to make sure we see this. While David is one of the greatest figures of the Old Testament, he is only a shadow of what was to come. If David was the better Saul, Jesus is the better David. Jesus also stood alone as the representative for his people. Jesus faced and overcame the greatest enemy, sin and death, while dying on the cross for the sins of the world. David's actions find their fulfillment in Jesus. So hear me, just as you imagine yourself in this story as a grateful and undeserving beneficiary of David's actions, you also must find yourself in Jesus' story as a grateful and undeserving beneficiary of Jesus' actions. So I think it's clear. God can accomplish great things through anyone. I want you to know what that means, okay? It means that God can accomplish great things through those who are in middle or high school. God can accomplish great things through those who don't have college degrees. God can accomplish great things through those who have physical and mental disabilities. God can accomplish great things through those who are brand new to the Christian faith. God can accomplish great things through those who are quickly approaching the end of their lives. God can accomplish great things through those who have no formal biblical or theological training. And ladies, I want to mention something quickly but passionately. This is a story of battle and warfare, and there aren't any women mentioned in this passage, but hear me clearly. This scripture is meant for you too. God can accomplish great things through anyone, women and men. In this story, David happens to be a man. But elsewhere in the Bible, we read about amazing women like Deborah, Rahab, Ruth, Lydia, and Priscilla, among so many others. In life, God desires to use women to accomplish his purposes just as much as men, and dare I say, sometimes even more so. There are great things only you can accomplish, and I want to encourage you to go out and do so. We in the church and we as men need you to do them. So what's our next step? Honestly, I think some of us need to increase our self-confidence, so to speak. We need to identify and reflect on the ways that God has uniquely and intentionally prepared each of us to play a role in his mission. We need to be like David. When he recalled God's hand in his encounters with the bear and the lion, we too need to remember how God has delivered us in the past. So here's what I want you to do. Take time this week and write down, whether on a computer or like physically paper and pen, remember what those are? Write down how God has delivered you from a particularly difficult or challenging experience. Write down the details and ask yourself some questions like this. What did I learn? What did I gain? What did I lose? How did I see God's hand clearly at work in that situation? Share your answers with a close friend, with a spouse, with your life group. Take time to reflect on how God may have used that experience already in your life and how he might use it in the future. And by the way, for some of you, that future might be now. Church, God can accomplish great things through anyone. Don't discount your unique experiences, gifts, or passions. Don't belittle yourself, saying you don't have enough this or that, or you haven't experienced something or the other. Why not you? Why can't you be the person that steps up, answers the call, and accomplishes great things for God?